Hey everyone, my name is Sara Harberson. I'm America's college counselor. It's good to be back here for another Facebook Live. I've been doing these Facebook Lives for years. You can find them all on my Facebook page for Sara Harberson and also Admissions Revolution. This is a chance for students, parents, even counselors to ask me questions about the college admissions process. And I love to hear from all of you as well. So feel free to let me know if you're a parent or a student, what year of high school you're in, and we can tackle all different types of college admissions questions. Obviously, all the high school students, depending on the grade level, they're in a different point in the process. We have high school seniors. Many of them are trying to make a final admissions decision by May 1st. That is the national reply date, unless the student was admitted to an early decision program. We've got a lot of juniors who are trying to finalize their classes, pick their teachers for letters of recommendation, and if you're like my own high school junior, trying to line up something really cool to do this summer. And then we've got freshmen and sophomores that have a lot of questions about start in terms of visiting colleges, picking classes, standardized tests, whatever questions you have, I'm always happy to answer as many as I can. So we're gonna get started with our first question. On the Common App, can a student list one major and then an alternate major? For example, if that first major is an impacted major at the school, that's a really good term that we can talk about, should you list a second choice? Okay, so a couple things. And we just did a Zoom call on the major choice for Application Nation class of 2024. And I showed them Common App. You may be surprised to learn this, but there's nowhere on the actual Common App, the template that goes to every college, there's nowhere on that template where the student is going to indicate their major choice. You have to go to the college's supplement and answer some questions. So if it's a big university, you might be asked which undergraduate school you would like to be considered for, and then you would be asked for your major choice. If it's a small liberal arts college, they won't have different schools. You're just going to be listing a major choice. And almost all the supplements, not all, but almost all of them for the colleges will give you an option to list a first choice and sometimes a second or third. But what I told my Application Nation class of 2024 families tonight is it's the major that you list first that's definitely going to have the most influence in the admissions process, because an admissions officer is trained to look at that first choice and then look to see what clues or evidence the student has to support that major choice. Obviously, if it is an impacted major, or it's sometimes called a capped major, that usually means that that college or university has limits on the number of students that they will admit either for freshman admissions or once the student gets there to that particular major or program. So if they give you an option to list a second choice, especially if it is a capped program, you definitely want to list a second or possibly even a third choice. If you're not willing to do that, I would take a step back, because sometimes it means you're only applying to that college for that specific major, and there could be a lot of other majors that could be interesting to you, or you could ultimately just change your mind. So keep things open-minded, especially with the major choice. Sometimes a college may not have your exact major choice, but the reality is, and I shared this tonight with our AN group, that close to 80% of students are going to change their minds about their major. So something to keep in mind. All right, next question. Does my sophomore's lack of participation in sports hurt her college application? Even though she's involved in honors, acting, science fairs, and speech, would you recommend that she join JV sports in her junior or senior years? Okay, here's the thing. Admissions officers aren't really looking for, certain things. They don't have like a bunch of check boxes when they're filling or evaluating a student's application. Like, okay, did the student do sports? Yes, check. If not, no check mark. Or, did they do performing arts? Check mark or no check mark? Did they have a paid job? Check mark or no check mark? All these are possibilities for extracurricular activities, but you don't necessarily have to have sports or even a paid job or something in the arts. So I encourage students to do what gives them joy, what is meaningful to them. And there are going to be plenty of students that are doing high school sports that are going to be applying, that a student who doesn't do it is not going to be disadvantaged in any way. The one thing that I do recommend that students have on their activities list, and remember, if you're filling out the common application, you have room for 10 activities. I recommend that 1 out of the 10 is related to community service or shows some volunteer work in the community. It doesn't have to be listed first. It doesn't have to be the primary activity that a student does. I would just say that colleges and universities do value community service. I don't find that community service necessarily is a silver bullet to get into a certain college or a certain type of college, but again, I do think it's important to have at least that on your list. And if you are not an athlete, that's okay. Just celebrate what you do really well and what is important to you. And I should mention that this is hot off the press for our younger Application Nation group. That is currently for the class of 2025 and 2026. So families who have freshmen and sophomores in high school, I have some one-on-one private sessions. So if you become an Application Nation member and you sign up for one of those private sessions, it is an added fee, but if you sign up for it, we get to have a great conversation over Zoom, and sometimes it's just me and the parents because the student is at school or isn't ready to talk about the college process. Sometimes the student is involved as well, and I can answer a lot of questions more in a more personalized way, and it really does help me get to know the student as well, especially if the family stays with application through senior year. Okay. Next question. Hi, Sarah. I have a high school junior. Is it necessary for her to have, I think it's a LinkedIn page. I'm assuming that's what you meant. She just applied to an elite summer opportunity and she noticed, I do see LinkedIn. She noticed they looked at her LinkedIn page, has one, but nothing on it. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's so funny how, I don't think I had a resume till I got to college, but this generation, they've got a resume, they've got a LinkedIn profile. I don't think it could hurt. I don't think it's going to impact the college admissions process, but if you're applying to internships or jobs or maybe even a program, that program might take a look at it, or the person running the internship program or, is overseeing the job that you're applying to, they might look at your LinkedIn page, but an admissions officer really doesn't have time to look at your LinkedIn page like someone else might. And I would just say, you have to remember that these admissions officers have a very limited time to read your application, and everything is really, it's been sped up in the process. When I first started in college admissions in the late 1990s, when I was a brand new admissions officer, I had about 20 minutes to read an application. It never took me 20 minutes. It was usually 25 or 30 minutes for me because that's the way that I would read the application and I needed more time. But the reality is that most admissions officers are reading an application in about 4 to 5 minutes. So everything has to be really clear and powerful and intentional in that application. And some families will say, well, how do you do that? I wrote a book about it. It's called SOUNDBITE, so definitely check it out. And it's all about the student really understanding who they are, their identity, what their strengths are, what the best thing about them is, and what makes them unique, and making sure that all of those things come through in their application so that they can stand out in an applicant pool. So that's one way to stand out. All right, next question. Hi, AN 2024 member. Thank you for being here, Andrea. My son is in PLTW, but has decided he wants to do business instead of engineering. I've seen that. He's in AP Calculus and a member of FBLA. Is it looked down upon if he's not going into engineering? Great great question. So we just talked about the PLTW classes, and we talked a lot about the business major tonight in our AN 2024 Zoom call. PLTW stands for Project Lead the Way. These are engineering elective classes that some high schools offer across the country. I would say that students who are interested or curious about the engineering field will sometimes take these classes if their high school has to offer, but by no means are they required. But I have seen students like Andrea's son that they take the PLTW classes and they realize, you know what, I don't think I want engineering. And that's one of the reasons, to try those classes out. So it is absolutely okay if the student doesn't want to continue with PLTW. Maybe for senior year they want to drop it, or maybe they drop that class before senior year. Absolutely okay. If they are pivoting, remember we never talk about quitting, we talk about pivoting. So if they're pivoting towards business, we just want to make sure that they have strong evidence to support that. Taking AP Calculus by senior year is very important for those business programs. You can be involved with business clubs at your high school, like FBLA or DECA, but you can also do homegrown projects. You can work for a company during the school year or the summer, or get an internship, or even do research for a business professor. There's so many ways to show an interest in business. Next question. My son has taken several AP classes and has scores from a 2 to a couple of 5s. Would you submit some scores and not others when it is obvious that he has taken more AP classes than scores than he would be submitting? So I have this approach, and people question it, families question it every time I bring it up in our Application Nation group. But my approach is you only want to share the things in your application that are going to strengthen your application. And especially if you're applying to some of the more selective colleges, what you provide, even if it's not required, all of a sudden becomes a part of the evaluation process. So besides a few colleges like Georgetown, for example, most colleges do not require a student to report AP scores on their admissions application. And so it is up to the student to determine which AP scores they should report. And almost always you're just self-reporting right on the application, at least for admissions purposes. If you're trying to get AP credit once you enroll at that college, you're going to need an official score report with your AP scores from the College Board. But for admissions, you're just self-reporting. So you get to pick and choose which scores to report. I remember working at the University of Pennsylvania, and there would be students who would do really well in every part of the application, but maybe they got a 4 on an AP exam, especially if that 4 was in a subject matter that lined up with their major. That was enough for the admissions committee to say, no, this student is not going to be admitted. So we need to be careful, especially for those highly selective colleges. And if they don't require AP scores to be reported in the application, I want students to be very intentional and thoughtful about which ones they report. Generally speaking, in Application Nation, I tell my families this advice, and they doubt it at first. And then they hear from our veteran AN families who've had other older students go through the process, who have followed my plan with AP scores and reporting, and they, will mention to other families, hey, listen, this really does work. And so sometimes I will say you could report some 4s to some selective colleges. Sometimes I will just say just report the 5s. Sometimes there's such a range of scores that it's almost better not to report any. One of our veteran AN families who has a student who is a senior in the AN 2023 group, she was mentioning to the AN 2024 group this week, hey, listen, my child had a range of scores and didn't want to draw attention to the fact that they were only going to report some scores and not others. So that student decided not to report any scores. And I have to go back. I think that student got into every college that student applied to, including some of the most selective colleges in the country, like Yale University and those schools. So just keep in mind that it's your choice almost always about whether or not to report scores. The last thing that I will mention, though, is just double check your high school transcript, your official high school transcript. There are a handful of high schools in the country that will report a student's AP scores and also their SAT or ACT scores. So if they are already being reported on your transcript, you kind of have to just accept that and understand that. But if you can get them removed before you apply, that could be a good thing for yourself and a lot of other students. If we haven't joined Application Nation 2024 yet, will we be behind in joining? Have we missed too much information to get caught up? Not at all. So we keep the group open until about Labor Day. So like that first week of September. I'm going to be honest. Families who join late in the summer or that last week before we close the group to new members, they will always tell us they wish they would have joined sooner. But I would say this is a great time to join. And we record all of the Zoom calls. So if you missed the February Zoom calls, the March Zoom calls, or even the first April call that we did this month, you can go back and watch the recording and see all of the resources as well. The group is very supportive and they're going to answer questions from their own experiences. I'm going to be sharing my advice as well. It's a really supportive, incredible group. And we now have thousands of AN alumni families who are incredibly supportive for our younger students as well. So I know a lot of those AN alumni families are helping our AN 2023 students make final decisions, especially if they have a child at the colleges that they're considering. So it's an incredible network and a great community as well. Heard through another channel that ChatGPT is going to make AO's job very difficult, and subsequently the acceptances will be impacted because ChatGPT is able to write very refined, genuine essays if the student puts in their interests, personal stories in the prompts. What are your thoughts on this? I think a lot of us are talking about ChatGPT. I think the colleges, the professors, the admissions office, teachers and administrators at high schools are talking about ChatGPT. Right now, I don't think it is as sophisticated as it needs to be. So all of the essays that I've seen from ChatGPT are pretty mediocre. And any good admissions officer who reads thousands of applications and tens of thousands of essays every single year, they're going to be able to tell. I can tell in a heartbeat. So right now, I would say that the technology is not advanced enough, especially for the more selective colleges that are requiring a main college essay and also requiring supplemental essays. But we will have to kind of wait and see. Some people are suggesting that the essay will be eliminated. I don't know. I don't think that's coming down the pike immediately, maybe down the road. But right now, I think, at least for the highly selected colleges, it's still going to be a factor. I could see more and more colleges requiring a graded writing paper that the student did for school, or possibly even doing a timed paper for that college down the road. But we're just not there right now. There are a handful of colleges right now, like Princeton University, will require a graded writing paper that the student did in high school, but that's pretty unusual. I think the thing that I'm thinking about isn't about whether students are using ChatGPT to write their essays. I mean, students are smart. They're going to do their own essay, right? What I'm really worried about is whether college admissions offices will begin to use AI to make admissions decisions. That's going to be the real big question coming down the pike. So we'll see. Hi, Shannon. Aloha, Sara. It's fun, of course, I know. My 2026 son is planning on canoe paddling and taking a class from I never know the Hawaiian pronunciation, pardon me, Shannon, a school in Hawaii on writing Hawaiian stories. Would this be a good way to spend his summer after freshman year? I feel like your daughter did something similar too. And oh my gosh, I love that this family is so committed to their culture and their heritage. So yes, I would love your son to do that. Couple things to keep in mind. the summer after ninth grade is just a great time for a student to explore and test the waters in different things. So a lot of times what the student does the summer after ninth grade, it doesn't end up making the extracurricular activities list unless the student ends up doing that activity for several summers. So it's kind of a freebie summer, not like a freebie summer to do nothing. I don't want them doing nothing, but they can kind of do something that they're kind of curious about with no pressure and no baggage to come along. They can just experience it. And if they like it, they can go back and do more of it. If not, they can do something else the next summer. So I think that's a really great way to spend the summer. I will say that, a lot of us in college admissions and college counseling are anxiously awaiting the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. I'm getting tons of questions from my AN families about how this is going to impact the admissions process. I can tell you that at the very least, if the U.S. Supreme Court ends affirmative action, the student will still be checking off a race box on their application, but the admissions officer would not have access to that. And so families are like, well, why are they doing that? Why are they permitted to do that? Well, a college or university will still need to track their demographics, their diversity of their applicant pool and their enrolled student body, and really compare and look at the numbers compared to what things were like before affirmative action was, ended. Let's say if it is ended, and I think a lot of people think it will be. So I think students will still be filling out checkboxes or indicating their race, but the admissions officer would not see that when they're evaluating the application. And it's very easy to block information from admissions officers. This is what happens when a student has self-reported test scores on their application, but they're applying test optional. The college will block that information from the admissions officers. That being said, even if affirmative action ends when the U.S. Supreme Court comes out with their ruling in June, unless the Supreme Court gives even more restrictions on it, the student probably is still going to be able to list cultural, racial activities or anything related to their heritage or even their religion. They can still pursue those activities and list them on their activities list. And frankly, when it comes to essays, if your heritage, your culture, your background, your family is really important to you, I have a feeling you're still going to be able to write your essay about it. All right, next question. Hi, Sarah, can you please talk about the order of activities? Volunteer work experience should be listed on the Common App, and should a resume be included where you can provide information in more detail? All right, so I think my most well-read blog ever, I never remember the exact name, but I know someone on our team is gonna post it. It's something like my foolproof way of ordering extracurricular activities or something like that. Check it out. It is pure gold. And so I wrote it several years ago, but students have been using it ever since. And it is a great way for a student to figure out what order to put their activities in. It is my belief that you put the most meaningful things to the student at the top. Any extracurricular activities that match up with the major choice, I want them towards the top. Activities that the student has done more consistently, the activities that the student is spending more time on. There, I see it. Thank you guys for adding it. The foolproof way to order is the start of the blog title. So you've got to think carefully about not just what activities you're going to share, but the order of it. And that blog is going to be really, really helpful. And you can assign points based on your time commitment, your leadership, your impact, how long you've been doing it. So it's a really helpful blog. But in terms of attaching a resume, I'm not a fan. There are going to be a handful of colleges in this country that really do want to see a resume. And those colleges tend to be some of the bigger public universities. I will say UT Austin seems to really like they ask for like an expanded resume. I know that a couple of other Southern universities tend to like the resume too. I know Florida State University is one of them. But for the most part, again, those admissions officers, they don't have time to look at a resume. It is much easier to view activities right on the application. It is much easier for admissions officers to review everything on that application. So they don't have time to open up links or looked at your LinkedIn profile or look carefully at that resume unless that college specifically requires it or specifically is going to be evaluating the student based on that resume. So I say put the time into your application, put the time into that activities list. It is such an influential piece of the application. So if you are in Application Nation and you are going into senior year, I do 2 full Zoom calls in August about filling out the application. One of them specifically is all about how to present your extracurricular activities in a really powerful way. Because there are some students who are big leaders and they think, wow, okay, I can just walk in and get into all these colleges. Not so. It's all about how you present your activities and your leadership roles. And then there are going to be some students that are not traditional leaders, and that's okay. It's all about how you view yourself and how good you are at articulating the impact that you have on these extracurricular activities. Okay, next question. College essay topics. What's your view on creative approaches to this? It depends what you mean by creative approach, right? It still has to be a traditional college essay. So it can't be a poem. It can't be, something like, one word in the middle of the page. It's gotta be a full-blown college essay. And most of the main college essay, most applications, including Common App, students will have an ability to write up to 650 words for the main college essay. And if I'm working with you on your essay in Application Nation, and I'm helping you edit that essay, I'm going to tell you to get as close to 650 words as possible. But you have to remember, these college essays it's not like a school assignment. It's not like an English essay or a history essay where you have to have, this perfect introductory paragraph and then you got your body of your essay and then a final conclusion, 5-paragraph essay. It doesn't work that way in college admissions. You have to remember that admissions officers are not English teachers. They're not history teachers. They're not teachers at your high school. They read things differently. They read things much faster. And so you've got to give them a topic that, they haven't seen before, or a topic that only you could write about. But it doesn't have to be this very structured 5-paragraph essay. So oftentimes when I'm helping a student edit their essay and they've got these 5 big paragraphs, they say, we can break these down into smaller paragraphs, because admissions officers need kind of a smaller bunch at a time. They're reading these essays very quickly, and so yes, you can be creative in terms of the topic that you write about, but ultimately it still needs to be about you, and it needs to be really clear where you're going. So I always tell my students in Application Nation to think about the college essay as a book-ended essay. What do I mean by that? I came up with the term. It means, what I wanted to see as an admissions officer, as an associate dean of admissions, as a dean of admissions. So a book-ended essay is an essay where you start your essay and it's very clear what your topic is all about. And then you develop that through a lot of self-awareness in the body of your essay. And then at the end of your essay, your last paragraph should come back to that topic, should come back to that message in a very self-aware, self-reflective way. So that bookended essay really allows an admissions officer, who in some cases is speed reading your essay, to make sure they've got the right topic and they know what direction you're going. Because a lot of times they will read that first paragraph, get a quick sense or not get a quick sense of what you're talking about, skim that middle section and go right down to that final paragraph to confirm that the essay is what they think it's going to be or what it is about. So that bookended essay is a really powerful structure to think about. So creative essays, I would say creative in that you want to pick a topic that nobody else in the world could write about, and that's when it's going to stand out. that's when an essay is really going to be special in an application and in an applicant pool. If you are a senior and you are having a difficult time deciding between two schools, what are some suggestions? This is really tough, yeah. So I think for a student who has multiple acceptances, what a great position to be in, right? That's what we all want. We want the student to be able to be admitted to a number of schools so that they feel like they have options. But if you have too many acceptances that you're weighing, it can be really overwhelming. So the first step, especially as it's so April 19th, and the national reply date will be May 1st. So we've got about a week and a half left to go. So if you haven't narrowed down the list, it's important to do that now. And I would recommend getting down to two colleges, 3 colleges at the most. So a student really shouldn't be weighing at this point 4, 5, 6 different college acceptances. It's just too much. So narrow it down to 2 or 3 at the most. Make sure, if you can, to go back and visit for their admitted student day or just a regular day during the week when you know classes are in session and students are going to be on campus. And then I would also talk it through with your parents. This is when it's like the stars align, because even if the student and the parent, the child and the parent are fighting about the college admissions process for an entire year leading up to this point, they get to this moment where they're trying to make a final decision, and I guarantee you they will need to talk to you. And you don't have to weigh in, you just need to listen. And they can talk things out with you, because you know what? You are the person to trust. What I do notice is when students sometimes seek out so many opinions right now about a final decision that they can't even hear their own voice. So it's important for parents to just be listeners, to let their child talk through all of their options. And I guarantee you, it's not just one conversation, it's usually multiple conversations. And most students will make a final decision, usually in the last couple of days, sometimes even the last 24 hours on May 1st. So give it a little bit of time, narrow it down, get on that campus when school is in session, and let your child just talk things out. It can make a really big difference. When should we start Application Nation 2025? So that would be the sophomores. So we have families who have freshmen in the group right now, and we have sophomores. It's probably about a 50-50 split. We'll be opening up the group in about a month for families who have students who are going to be going into high school. So really any time that you feel like you need that support, where you have questions on a pretty regular basis, and maybe it's good to check in with Facebook Live and my Instagram Live events that I have, but maybe you have more in-depth questions and you want to have a one-on-one. So it really depends on what works for the family. There are going to be some families that start as soon as their child becomes a high school freshman or finishes up 8th grade. And then there's some families who wait a little bit longer for a variety of reasons. Sometimes the student just isn't ready. Sometimes they want to make sure that they are budgeting everything. And so there are a lot of things to consider. But ultimately, if you've got an incoming high school freshman, that's when you can join one of the Application Nation groups. All right, final question of the night. Where do you give details of activities? 150 characters is too little to fit things in. I totally agree, but you know what? You got me. And I look at those activity slots and those listings as a puzzle for me. I think that even though you only have 150 characters to describe the activity, hey, you've got 100 characters to describe the club or the organization that you are a part of, and then you've got another 50 characters to describe your title. So 50 characters for the title, 100 characters for the club name or the company you work for or the novel you wrote, 150 characters for a clear description. That's a lot of characters. So I teach students in Application Nation starting in August, right before they start senior year, how to use that space, those 3 things in each listing, and use them to their advantage. So I never want students to just describe themselves and their roles in these clubs in a very generic way, even if it's a common activity at their high school or a common activity for a lot of high school students. It's all about the way you present yourself. So I hope that you will follow that advice. I hope that you will see how powerful the SOUNDBITE concept is in terms of picking a major, filling out your activities list, and identifying the things that you want to highlight in your application. And when you do that, you have great success in the admissions process. So I hope you all have a great night, and I look forward to seeing you back here again for our next Facebook Live in May. Take care.